Write me 2 more parts to add to the story. Each part is 100, 200 words. The introduction states the most interesting action of the story and urges people to listen to the whole story to know the ending. At the same time, we call on everyone to subscribe to the channel to support and follow many good stories, and write an ending that summarizes the story from a positive personal perspective. Invite everyone to comment and give opinions to discuss. Write separately, and I will copy it into the story myself. Caleb Marshall had stopped counting how many nights he'd spent beneath open skies since his medical discharge from the Marines. Tonight, the heavens above the Central Valley of California glimmered with distant stars, and the vast farmland beneath felt eerily empty. Stray memories of desert deployments still haunted him, searing sandstorms, the thunder of rotor blades, and the desperate, thirsty eyes of local villagers grateful for any fresh water. In those days, Caleb had prided himself on building wells and purification systems under the toughest conditions. Now, ironically, he found himself drifting through an agricultural heartland suffering a punishing drought, searching once again for water, shelter, and perhaps just a bit of peace. He walked with a limp, the result of shrapnel that had lodged in his right knee years ago. Despite operations and physical therapy, the joint never healed quite right. Each step on the uneven dirt road sent a mild jolt of pain racing up his thigh, but he'd learned to push it aside. The discipline, hammered into him by years of military service, refused to let him complain. Instead, he counted each step. This silent routine gave him something to focus on other than the discomfort. A single tattered duffel bag hung from his shoulder. Inside it lay the last tangible pieces of his identity: old service ribbons, engineering manuals, a battered toolkit, and a small notebook filled with sketches of piping layouts and makeshift filtration systems. He would show those sketches to potential employers, but they usually saw only a drifter with a ragged beard, worn boots, and no permanent address. Nobody seemed to care that in Afghanistan, his designs had saved entire platoons when official supply lines were cut off. Nobody asked how he'd managed to transform salvaged vehicle parts into a working water pump. They preferred to see him as a vagrant, a charity case, someone to be pitied rather than hired. Caleb had spent the last few months moving through various small towns, picking up day labor in orchards, vineyards, and packing sheds. Most were barely scraping by themselves. Farmers who might have once offered a handshake and a hot meal were weighed down by rising costs and lower yields. The drought had crippled them. Sometimes he'd earn enough for a motel, but more often he slept behind barns or under tractor canopies. Given his mechanical background, he could usually fix a broken fan, repair a faulty hose, or patch up an old generator in exchange for dinner. That night, a relentless wind blew dust across the back roads. A lonely sign reading Knoxville County, 10 miles offered no comfort. His water bottle was nearly empty, and the dryness in his throat conjured the memory of desert grit. Stumbling into a ditch, he spotted faint lights in the distance, possibly a farmhouse or storage shed. Where there was light, there might be water. Summoning the last of his energy, he pressed on, each step carrying him closer to another uncertain tomorrow. But then, that was how life had been for him ever since he'd hung up his uniform. One foot in front of the other, hoping this time he'd find a place or a person that needed what he could offer. Close to midnight, Caleb found a small gravel path leading off the main road, a rusty mailbox with faded letters spelled Keegan's Orchard. He squinted through the darkness at a row of orange trees, leaves drooping in the drought. Beyond them, a tin-roof building rested against the horizon. Even from a distance, he could discern it was some kind of equipment, with large doors, battered siding, the sort of place that might house tractors, spare parts, or battered machinery. Despite the late hour, he could hear a distant whir and clang. It sounded like a motor on its last legs, protesting with a metallic screech every few seconds. Caleb glanced around. No light shone from the main farmhouse if there was one. It might be further down the orchard rows. He figured the noise came from a pump or generator someone had neglected. He approached cautiously. Though he'd faced snipers and IEDs, the possibility of being confronted by an irate landowner with a shotgun was a different kind of threat. He'd learned to tread softly around private property, with the orchard so quiet. The mechanical groans stood out in the night air. "Maybe I can help," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Because if he couldn't help, at least the building might provide shelter until morning. The shed door was slightly ajar. He peered in, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness broken by the flicker of a single overhead light. The interior smelled of old oil, dusty cardboard, and burnt metal. In one corner, a large water pump coughed out a steady stream of hot air. The connected piping rattled ominously, and water droplets hissed onto the motor casing. Before he could investigate further, a figure appeared from behind a stack of crates. Caleb froze. The man who emerged was of medium height, face creased with age, wearing suspenders and a stained work shirt. Shock registered across the older man's features for an instant, followed by wary determination. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice gruff but edged with fear. Caleb raised his hands, palms out in a gesture of peace. "Easy, sir. I heard the machine. Sounded like it was about to blow. I'm just passing through." The older man stared at him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he grimaced as if in resignation. "Pump's been acting up all day. I'm Martin Keegan," he said, not offering his hand. "This orchard's been in my family 3 generations. You alone, just me," Caleb replied quietly. He lowered his arms and nodded towards the struggling pump. "I've worked on machines like that before. Used to build rigs for water distribution." Martin rubbed his eyes and let out a sigh. "You look like you could use some water yourself. But if you know anything about motors, maybe you can save this thing before it tears itself apart." Caleb set down his duffel. Despite the day's exhaustion, he felt a glimmer of purpose. "I'll take a look," he said, stepping carefully towards the pump that hissed and rattled like an overworked soldier on its last stand. Inside the shed, the overhead bulb offered just enough light for Caleb to see that the pump's belt was frayed, the motor casing scalding hot to the touch. He pulled out a small flashlight from his pocket. The beam revealed dried rust flakes at the joints and crusted calcium deposits around the intake. The entire setup looked precarious. As he leaned in, the belt snapped with a sharp crack, causing the machinery to shudder violently. Martin cursed under his breath, stepping back as water sprayed from a loose seal. Without hesitation, Caleb shut off the power switch. The pump groaned to a halt, a tortured, final gasp of machinery. For a moment, the only sounds were dripping water and the pounding of both men's hearts. You might have lost it for good if that belt whipped around under tension. Caleb remarked. Martin grabbed a dirty rag to wipe his brow. His eyes revealed something more than just frustration, a deep weariness. "This orchard's on the brink," he confessed. "Without a working irrigation system, my trees won't last another week in this drought. And that means we won't last either." Caleb examined the belt. "I have a few spares in my duffel, but I'm not sure if they'll fit. Let me check." He rummaged through his battered toolkit. His inventory was a patchwork of items collected from hardware stores or found in junkyards, each with a story behind it. He found a belt slightly longer than the broken one, but he figured he could adjust the tension if the motor's bracket allowed. While he worked, Martin explained in short bursts, "I served in the Army, back in '56. Then my father passed, leaving me this land. It was enough to get by for a while. Fruit used to fetch a decent price. Now, between the drought and these corporate water deals, we're strangled. My daughter helps where she can, but times are tough for all of us." Caleb nodded sympathetically. He'd heard similar tales from other small farms: spiraling water costs, oppressive deals from big companies, bank loans that never ended. After carefully installing the new belt, he tightened the tension. "Let's give it a slow run," he said, flipping the breaker back on. The motor whined, but this time did not thrash. Water began coursing through the intake pipe, though at a somewhat reduced flow. "Better than nothing," Caleb admitted. "I can't guarantee how long it'll hold, but it won't break down immediately. Martin set his hands on his hips, releasing a ragged breath. That's more than I had an hour ago. Thank you. He paused, studying the younger man. What's your name? Stranger, I should at least know who saved me from a midnight meltdown. Caleb Marshall. He said simply, I used to be a combat engineer. Been wandering since I got out. Martin nodded, some of his guardedness fading. There's a spare cot in the old bunkhouse behind the orchard. If you don't mind the dust, you can stay the night. We can figure out the rest in the morning. A wave of gratitude washed over Caleb. Thanks, he replied. I appreciate that. As the machinery settled into a low hum, both men realized they were caught in something bigger than a broken pump, a quiet fight against nature and circumstance, one they'd somehow have to win together. At dawn, Caleb woke to the soft crowing of a distant rooster. The bunkhouse was a cramped, single-room structure with peeling paint and a bare mattress on a rusted metal frame. Still, it beat sleeping in a ditch. He rubbed the stiffness out of his knee and limped outside, greeted by long rows of orange and lemon trees. The orchard looked peaceful enough in the early light, but he could see the wilting leaves and cracked earth where irrigation lines had dried up. This place needed water and hope in equal measure. Off to his right stood an old farmhouse with a sagging porch, the American flag hanging motionless. He heard faint clinks of cookware, somebody preparing breakfast. Unsure if he was welcome, Caleb lingered near the bunkhouse until he saw Martin waving him over from the porch steps. Coffee's on, the older man called, wiping his hands on his trousers. Come on in. Meet my wife. Inside, the air smelled of fried eggs and bacon. A kindly woman with silver-streaked hair smiled as Caleb entered. You must be Mr. Marshall, she greeted in a gentle voice. I'm Harriet Keegan. My husband tells me you saved our pump last night. Caleb shifted awkwardly, unused to such hospitality. I just patched it. He'd have done the same for me if the roles were reversed. She poured him a cup of steaming coffee. It tasted better than anything he'd had in weeks. Harriet and Martin shared a quick glance, an unspoken conversation passing between them. Then Martin cleared his throat. Son, I'm not sure how long you plan on staying around here, but we could really use a pair of extra hands, especially skilled ones. Before Caleb could respond, footsteps sounded behind him. A woman in her early 30s entered, carrying a stack of mail. She had Martin's sharp eyes and Harriet's warm smile. Morning, Tita. Daddy. Mom, she said, before turning toward Caleb. I'm Sarah. You must be the nighttime mechanic. There was a teasing note in her voice, but her eyes held curiosity. Caleb gave a small nod. Caleb. Yes, ma'am. Guess I earned that title. Sarah gestured at the letters in her hand. Bills, bills, and more bills? She sighed. No wonder we're behind on maintenance. As Harriet set plates on the table, Caleb felt a pang of guilt. He had nowhere else to be, but also no means of paying for his stay. Martin must have sensed his concern. Listen, the older man said, I know you probably have your own road to follow, but I could offer you some wages if you can keep our equipment running whatever we can spare. The orchard's in dire straits, but we can at least provide a roof and meals. Caleb looked at Harriet, then Sarah, and finally back at Martin. He saw honest folks trying desperately to hold on to their legacy. His mind flashed back to missions overseas, where local families had clung to their farmland with the same resolve. I appreciate that, he replied quietly. I'll stay, at least until we see if this orchard can be saved. After breakfast, Martin led Caleb to a dusty workshop near the main barn. Various tools hung from the walls, some rusted, some well kept. A large wooden workbench jutted out, piled with half-finished projects, an old tractor carburetor, pieces of irrigation piping, a welding mask. Used to be my father's domain, Martin said, voice tinged with nostalgia. He could craft anything from a hunk of metal. Me, I get by. A battered metal cabinet stood in a corner, doors ajar to reveal even more odds and ends. Gaskets, bolts, washers, and belts. Caleb smiled. noticing that despite the clutter, there was a certain order. "It's a good start," he said, setting his toolkit down. "I've worked with far less in the field." Martin nodded. "We'll need to check every section of that irrigation system. Pipes are cracked in places, some sprinklers clogged. Our main pump is on borrowed time. As you saw, if we can keep it limping along, we might manage this season." Before they could dive further, Sarah arrived, holding a ring-bound notebook. "Dad, I've been taking notes on water usage and orchard output," she explained. "For the last month, we barely watered half the acreage, Ramoange. With the heat wave, the trees in the southern plot are in critical condition." She flipped a page showing calculations of gallons per minute, recommended daily water for citrus trees, and actual usage. Caleb whistled low. "No wonder that pump was about to blow. You're pushing it beyond capacity." Martin grunted his agreement. "The orchard's about 70 acres total, mostly oranges, a few rows of lemons. We used to rotate watering schedules, but the drought messed everything up, plus the well's running low." Sarah added, "We had to purchase water from the county reservoir at inflated rates." Caleb's mind whirred with potential solutions, from repiping sections to adjusting flow. It felt a bit like a military operation assessing resources, identifying vulnerabilities, and planning a strategy. "First thing, let's see how many spare parts we can salvage. Then we can plan a day or two to patch the worst leaks before hooking everything up again." They spent the rest of the morning sorting through the workshop. Harriet occasionally popped in with lemonade or sandwiches, fussing that Caleb looked too thin. He thanked her, somewhat overwhelmed by the motherly attention. It had been ages since anyone worried about his well-being. By midday, they had a workable inventory of parts. Caleb noted each item in a new log. "If we're short on anything major," he said, "I could drive into town and see if we can find used parts at the scrapyard. I've had good luck there before." Martin's brows furrowed. "Money's tight," he warned, "but if it keeps us afloat, we'll find a way." Sarah offered a small, determined smile. "We always do, Dad. We always do." In that moment, Caleb felt a strange surge of belonging, as though he'd stepped into a family that was both burdened and bound by this land. If they were willing to do anything to save the orchard, then so was he. That afternoon, the temperature soared above 100 degrees. Heat shimmered across the fields, and the orchard's dusty ground seemed to suck the moisture from every living thing. Caleb and Martin worked side by side, replacing corroded sections of piping. Each time they found a crack or leak, Martin's shoulders tightened, as though another small piece of hope was slipping away. They trudged along rows of withered orange trees, leaves curling in protest of the unrelenting sun. Sarah walked ahead, marking problem spots with bright orange flags. The orchard stretched further than Caleb had initially realized, each row telling a silent story of neglect forced upon it by drought and financial strain. At one point, Harriet appeared with a jug of cold water and cups for them. She insisted they all take a break under the shade of a large oak tree near the orchard's entrance. Caleb gratefully accepted, gulping the cool liquid that tasted almost miraculous. As they rested, Harriet spoke softly about the orchard's history. Martin's grandfather settled here after returning from World War I, planted citrus and built a small house. Over time, they added more acreage. Martin served in the army too, but when his father passed, he came home to keep the place running. Now Sarah's the next generation, but I fear there won't be much whist if this drought keeps up. She glanced at her husband, whose expression was a mixture of pride and sorrow. Caleb listened, stirred by the parallels to his own life. He'd been deployed overseas, seen communities devastated by war. Yet here, in his own country, was a quieter battle against nature and corporate greed, one that could be just as destructive. When the sun dipped lower, they resumed their tasks. By dusk, Caleb's shirt was drenched in sweat, his knee throbbing. Yet he felt a sense of accomplishment. They'd managed to fix several major leaks, likely saving hundreds of gallons per day. It was a start, albeit a small one. Back at the farmhouse, Harriet laid out a simple meal of grilled chicken, vegetables, and homemade bread. Sarah talked about potential grants or loan programs for farms impacted by the drought. Martin mentioned how the orchard next door had sold off to a company called AquaGrow that consolidated water rights. They keep pressuring us, he said, claiming they'll solve all our problems. But I know what that means, losing the farm. Caleb frowned. He'd heard whispers of corporations buying up farmland and then turning local families into tenants. Or worse, forcing them out entirely. Is there no middle ground, he asked. Sarah shook her head. Not with them. They want ownership. People who hold out either pay exorbitant water fees or watch their crops die. A heavy silence followed, broken only by the cicadas outside. Caleb realized just how precarious their situation was. Helping patch pipes was good, but the orchard needed a bigger solution. And he, despite his engineering background, was just one man with a duffel bag of tools. Yet a spark of stubborn resolve lit in his chest. We'll figure something out, he murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure how. Night settled over the Keegan orchard. Despite the exhaustion coursing through his muscles, Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat on the bunkhouse steps, listening to the distant hum of insects and the occasional bark of a farm dog. The silhouettes of the orange trees formed dark columns against the moonlit sky, as if bearing silent witness to the orchard's struggles. His mind wandered back to his time in the Marines. He recalled building water distribution lines in remote desert villages, improvising with scant resources and harsh terrain. There, the daily threat had been hostile fire or hidden explosives. Here, it was the slow strangulation of drought. But in both places, the fight was for survival. Soft footsteps approached. Caleb turned to see Sarah, a lightweight shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She offered a small smile. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. He shook his head. Too much on my mind. She sat on the step beside him, gazing out at the orchard. This place, it's all I've ever known. I left for college for a couple of years, studied agricultural management, but I came back when Mom got sick. It's funny, I always thought there'd be more time to modernize things, but then the drought got worse. She paused, as though sifting through memories, and now it feels like we're one bad season away from losing it all. Caleb caught a tremor in her voice. Your dad mentioned AquaGrow. Sarah exhaled slowly. They've offered us deals. Honestly, some neighbors caved in. They see it as a guaranteed paycheck, but that paycheck means giving up the land. It means letting a corporation decide how we grow, harvest, even live. Dad refuses. He says Grandpa didn't fight in 2 wars just so we could hand this orchard over. Caleb looked at his hands, remembering the day he signed his own enlistment papers, believing he'd serve, then return to a grateful nation. Reality had been harsher. I understand. Once you lose something precious, you can't just buy it back. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the moon casting silvered light on the orchard. Eventually, Sarah spoke again. I appreciate your help. We barely know each other, but you've already done so much. Dad trusts you. That means a lot. He shrugged, feeling a slight flush of embarrassment and, I'm just trying to fix what I can. Guess it's a habit from my service days. When she rose to go back inside, she paused. Don't let Dad work you too hard tomorrow, she teased lightly. He forgets not everyone's as stubborn as he is. Then she slipped back into the farmhouse, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts. For a moment, he watched her silhouette fade, then looked again at the orchard. If only this orchard had half the resources he'd seen wasted overseas, the Keegans would be secure. The notion angered him, spurring an urge to do more. Even if it meant diving into the financial or political side areas, he had no experience in, Caleb resolved to fight for this land as though it were his own. The next day dawned with a swirl of clouds in the sky. Though none promising any real rain, Caleb started early, checking the previously patched sections, ensuring no new leaks had sprung overnight. He was just finishing when he heard an engine rumble up the gravel drive. Glancing back, he saw a sleek black SUV with tinted windows roll to a stop near the farmhouse. Immediately, his instincts prickled. This was not the sort of vehicle local farmers used. Two men emerged, both in crisp polo shirts emblazoned with the Aqua Grow logo. One was tall and thin, the other more stout, with a face that seemed perpetually fixed in a businesslike smirk. Harriet stood on the porch, arms crossed, while Martin approached them with a steely expression. Sarah joined her parents, crossing her own arms in silent solidarity. From his vantage point, Caleb watched. He couldn't hear the entire conversation, but snatches of it drifted across. The taller representative, introducing himself as Daniel Walsh, spoke smoothly about economic relief and optimized water distribution while handing Martin a slick brochure. The stout man chipped in with remarks about saving the orchard from certain ruin. Harriet said something Caleb couldn't catch, but it was clearly dismissive. A noticeable tension hung in the air. Martin looked from the brochure to the men, then shook his head. "Like I told your boss before," he said loudly enough that Caleb caught the gist. "We're not selling, and we're not signing any contract that puts our water rights in your hands." Daniel Walsh smiled thinly, as if he'd rehearsed for this. "Mr. Keegan, with the prolonged drought, it's only a matter of time. We can offer a generous package that ensures your family is set for life." Sarah's voice cut through like a whip. "We're not giving up our farm so you can poison the land with your corporate demands. Your so-called package is just hush money for handing over our well. And we know how you treat those who sign with you." Martin tried to stay calm, but his jaw flexed in anger. "I think we're done here," he said, stepping back. The stout man gave a mocking shrug. "Suit yourselves. But as water becomes scarcer, don't come crying to us when your orchard withers." With that, they climbed back into their SUV, slamming the doors. Tires spat gravel as they sped off, leaving an acrid atmosphere behind. Caleb approached once the SUV was gone. Harriet forced a small smile at him, but she couldn't hide the unease in her eyes. Martin crushed the brochure in his fist. "That's the second time in a month they've come," he muttered. "Always the same spiel, always the same threats." Sarah exhaled, adrenaline clearly coursing through her. "They're right about one thing: water is scarce. If we don't find a better way to irrigate, we'll be an easy target. We need a game plan." Caleb nodded, feeling the weight of their predicament. He recalled how his engineering unit had tackled desert water supply lines under enemy fire. Sometimes, success hinged on innovation and forging alliances. But who, he wondered, could they possibly turn to out here, where AquaGrow dominated the region's water politics like an iron fist? They gathered in the workshop, the tension from the AquaGrow visit still crackling in the air. Martin paced, hands clasped behind his back, while Harriet sat on a stool, sipping tea and rubbing her temples. Sarah flipped through pages of financial records, each glance making her brow crease deeper. Caleb stood by the workbench, arms folded, trying to piece together a feasible plan. Sarah broke the silence first. "We owe the bank for the tractor loan, plus the monthly water bill from the county reservoir. Our orchard income is half of what it used to be. If the main pump fails, or we need more water than we can afford." She left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Martin stopped pacing. "We can't keep patching things forever. If only we could find a better system, something that cuts down water usage drastically. I know big companies use sophisticated drip systems, but that's pricey." Caleb cleared his throat. "Back when I was stationed overseas, we set up drip lines made from recycled tubing. We used gravity feed from raised tanks to reduce pump load. We also separated zones to only water what was necessary. Maybe we could do something similar here: scavenge parts, reorganize the orchard's layout. Sarah looked intrigued. Gravity feed, we'd need an elevated tank. We have a small water tower, but it's not in great shape. And what about controlling flow rates across different zones? Manual valves. For a start, Caleb replied, automated ones are expensive, but we could upgrade if we find cheaper solutions. Or maybe there are grants or local programs that support sustainable farming. We just need enough time to implement. Harriet frowned. Time is exactly what we don't have. She glanced at Martin, who seemed lost in thought. Suddenly he spoke, voice low but firm. We might be out of short-term answers, so we have to bet on long-term. We'll salvage every pipe, see if we can rig up a partial drip system. If it can cut our usage by even 20%, that's a start. Sarah nodded, making a note. I'll go online tonight, see if any local cooperatives or environmental groups can donate supplies. Meanwhile, we'll just keep the orchard running day by day. The conversation petered out, replaced by an unspoken determination. Caleb felt the pull of purpose again, as though he were part of a unit with a shared mission, but he also sensed the limitations. These folks weren't flush with men, nor did they have specialized connections. They were pinned between AquaGrow's looming threats and the brutal realities of nature. Before they dispersed, Martin placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. We're grateful for any help you can give, son. I know you're not obligated to stay. Caleb met his gaze. I'm staying, he said, his voice steady. I can't walk away from people who need a solution. Not after what I've seen. A flicker of gratitude passed across Martin's face. Harriet offered a supportive nod, and Sarah managed a tight smile. The orchard might be on the brink, but at least they had a united front for whatever came next. That evening, a rare breeze brought cooler air across the orchard, rustling the leaves in gentle sighs. The Keegans invited Caleb to join them on the farmhouse porch after dinner, a ritual they used to practice when times were better. Harriet lit a citronella candle to ward off the mosquitoes, and Martin poured sweet tea into mismatched glasses. They chatted about small things, at first local gossip, the changing shape of the nearby river, a coyote that had been spotted sneaking onto the property. Caleb listened more than he spoke, absorbing the sense of community that radiated from the family. Eventually, Sarah leaned forward. Dad, you never told me exactly how Grandpa expanded the orchard. Didn't he face a drought back in the 70s too? Martin nodded, swirling his tea thoughtfully. Yeah, the big drought of 76. Grandpa always said that was the hardest year he'd seen, short of the Dust Bowl stories he heard from his elders. But he made do with what little water was available, set up rudimentary drip lines from old hoses. Whenever a tree died, he'd replant a variety more suited to the climate. He was relentless, Harriet added softly. He also had neighbors he could lean on. Those days, folks around here treated each other like family. They'd share water if one well ran dry, or pool money to buy seeds in bulk. Times have changed. These corporations come in, wave dollar signs, and pit neighbor against neighbor. Caleb looked at the silhouette of the orchard under the moon. Maybe the old ways are still worth something, he mused. Shared resources, local alliances. It might not be perfect, but it sure sounds better than letting AquaGrow decide everything. Sarah sighed. We tried forming a collective last year. Some orchard owners were on board, but after AquaGrow started buying out smaller plots, everything fell apart. Folks were scared. They wanted to secure their own farm, even if it meant losing autonomy. A hush descended. Martin cleared his throat. I know we seem stubborn, but Harriet and I both served. She was a nurse in the Air Force. We believe in the idea that you fight for what you have, for your family, for your land. His voice grew quieter. Sometimes I wish I could do more. Caleb raised his glass in a toast. To doing more, he said solemnly. They clinked glasses. Letting the moment settle, Harriet turned to Caleb. You're part of this now. You know, I hope you don't regret it. He shook his head. Not for a second. It was the closest thing to acceptance he'd felt since returning home from his final deployment. The orchard, for all its troubles, gave him a reason to get up each morning, to push through pain and doubt. Perhaps this was the purpose he'd been longing for, a chance to stand side by side with people who refused to surrender, no matter the odds. The following day, Caleb and Sarah drove an old pickup into the nearest town, a modest cluster of buildings where the main street still sported a diner, hardware store, and a single blinking traffic light. Their mission was twofold: scavenge low-cost supplies for the drip system and inquire about any local farm assistance programs. Sarah parked the truck near Benny's Hardware, a sprawling, family-owned store that seemed to stock everything from roofing nails to livestock feed. Inside, the aisles smelled of sawdust and fertilizer. Caleb steered a cart to the plumbing section, scanning for bargains. They found sections of vinyl tubing on clearance, leftover drip emitters in a half-open box, and a pile of plastic connectors that might adapt to the orchard's current piping. It wasn't perfect or uniform, but it was cheap. Caleb inspected each part, ensuring it wasn't too brittle or damaged. Benny, the elderly store owner, wandered over. Howdy, Miss Keegan, stocking up. I see, he said, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. Sarah tried to force a cheerful smile. Just trying to keep things running. Benny, heard of any new programs that help farms convert to drip irrigation? Benny pursed his lips. Saw a flyer about a county workshop next month, but that's about it. The extension office might have details. Or maybe talk to the local farm bureau. They sometimes have grants. Caleb perked up. We'll check that out. Every bit helps. They paid for the supplies, filling the truck bed with a precarious assortment. Then they headed to the county extension office a few blocks away, a small, tan building that doubled as an agricultural resource center. Inside, Sarah approached a polite receptionist, explaining their orchard's predicament. The woman handed over pamphlets on water conservation, along with an application for a small sustainability pilot grant. As Sarah filled out the form, Caleb watched others in the waiting area, older farmers with worn faces, some flipping through seed catalogs, others tapping their boots anxiously. It struck him how many were probably in the same predicament, grappling with relentless drought, rising costs, and corporate overtures. After an hour, they left with a sheaf of paperwork. Sarah exhaled as they climbed back into the pickup. Not a guaranteed solution, but maybe we can get a few $1,000s if we're approved. That could cover some better equipment. Caleb nodded. Better than nothing. We'll do what we can in the meantime with what we've got. They stopped by the local diner for a quick meal. Over burgers and iced tea, Sarah told him more about the orchard's finances. We're behind on property taxes. Dad took out a loan to repair the well last year, but that money's nearly gone. If we can't increase our yield or reduce our water bills soon. She trailed off, eyes downcast. Caleb reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand, a reassuring gesture that took him by surprise as much as her. We'll keep fighting, he said. We haven't lost yet. Her gaze flickered with gratitude, though overshadowed by uncertainty. Let's just hope we're not too late. Back at the orchard, Martin and Harriet were unpacking crates of fertilized soil near the workshop. The strain was evident in Martin's movements. His shoulders stooped, and his exhalations were heavier than usual. Harriet kept glancing at him with concern, but he waved off her offers of rest. Not now, he mumbled. We have too much to do. Caleb parked the truck and hopped out, helping Sarah unload the piping. They relayed their findings about the county extension office and the possible grant. Martin listened, expression guarded, as though he'd been disappointed too often to muster much hope. They began laying out the new tubing in the southern plot, the orchard's driest section. Caleb measured rows to ensure an even distribution, while Sarah inserted drip emitters at the base of each tree. Harriet supplied them with water jugs and occasional moral support. Martin hammered stakes into the ground to anchor the lines, working methodically, yet wincing every so often as if in pain. After hours under the afternoon sun, they'd managed to set up a crude but functional drip system over a quarter of the orchard's southern area. Caleb crouched down to test the flow. Water dripped steadily onto the roots instead of spraying overhead. The method was far more efficient, losing less water to evaporation. Martin nodded in reluctant approval. "This might buy us some time," he conceded. Suddenly, Harriet rushed over from where she'd been mixing a soil amendment. Her voice trembled. Martin, Caleb, and Sarah turned to see Martin, bent double, clutching his chest. "Dad," Sarah cried, dropping her tools. She ran to him, helping him stay upright. Harriet's hands shook. He's had chest pains before, but never like this. Caleb's heart lurched as he dashed forward. Military training kicked in. He guided Martin to sit against a tree, quickly checking his pulse. It pounded erratically, sweat beating on Martin's forehead. "We need to get you inside," Caleb said, fighting the urge to panic. Martin tried to protest, but his words came out in a gasp. Harriet barked an order that brooked no defiance. With Caleb's help, Sarah eased her father into the back seat of their farm truck. Harriet jumped in the driver's seat. "We're heading to the hospital," she announced. Caleb stood there, chest tight, watching the truck speed away in a cloud of dust. Sarah's face a mask of fear. He felt helpless, adrenaline still surging. Minutes ago, they'd been wrestling with hoses, trying to solve an irrigation problem. Now, Martin's life hung in the balance. He realized how fragile everything was: the orchard, the family, the man who refused to yield to AquaGrow. One moment they were rigging drip lines. The next, Martin was gasping for breath. Caleb prayed that Martin would pull through. He also prayed that the orchard could hold on without him, at least for a while. Caleb stayed behind, shock coiling in his gut. He tended to the orchard's immediate needs, checking the newly laid drip lines for leaks, ensuring no tool or valve was left dangerously open. The late afternoon sun cast a harsh glow across the rows, and for a moment the orchard felt deserted, missing its patriarch. When Harriet finally called from the hospital, it was nearly dusk. She spoke with shaky relief. Martin had suffered a minor heart attack, but the doctors believed he would recover if he took it easy. They were keeping him overnight for observation. Sarah would stay with him. Harriet planned to return before dark to gather some belongings. Caleb exhaled, tension easing. He closed the irrigation lines, feeling an odd protectiveness over the orchard. In Martin's absence, it felt like a battlefield without its commanding officer. He was determined to keep it secure until the family returned. An hour later, Harriet pulled up, stepping out of the truck with reddened eyes. She mustered a worn smile at Caleb's concerned look. "He's stable," she said softly, "but the doctor says stress is a big factor. I doubt we can remove the orchard's problems, but we need to ease his load." Caleb gestured around. "I'll handle the orchard tasks. You just focus on Martin." She nodded gratefully, then went inside to gather clothes and toiletries. When she emerged, she hesitated. "Caleb, thank you. This isn't your fight, yet here you are." He shook his head. "I think it is my fight now. You all gave me shelter and purpose. I won't let you face this alone." Harriet's eyes glistened. "I'm driving back to the hospital. Sarah will stay the night there. Maybe tomorrow morning. We'll know more." After she left, Caleb found himself alone with the orchard again. Darkness fell, the trees becoming shadows in the moonlight. He heated up a can of soup in the farmhouse kitchen, the emptiness of the rooms amplifying the sense of absence. Later, pacing the porch, he tried to formulate a plan. How could they reduce Martin's stress? One way was to push forward with the drip system, secure more water. Another was to see if there were allies in the region who hadn't sold out to AquaGrow. If enough farmers banded together, they could resist corporate pressure and share resources. He thought back to how, in his unit, the key to survival often lay in forging alliances with local tribes. Perhaps the orchard needed something similar, a community approach rather than fighting alone. The question was, who to trust? He gazed at the starlit sky, recalling desert nights when he dreamed of returning home. Now he was home, in a sense, but the fight felt just as dire. Tomorrow, he resolved, he'd visit a few neighbors. Maybe someone else had an idea or a spare well connection. He wouldn't give up, not when the stakes were so personal. The next morning brought a subdued sunrise, the horizon muted behind a thin layer of high clouds. Caleb rose early, checking the orchard's drip lines and the main pump. Water trickled steadily beneath the battered belt he'd installed, showing signs of wear but still holding together. He half expected the pump to blow at any moment, yet it kept chugging. He'd scribbled a list of addresses Harriet had mentioned, nearby farms owned by families who, as far as he knew, hadn't sold out to Aqua Grow yet. After a quick breakfast of toast and eggs alone in the farmhouse, he climbed into the old truck and set off down a dusty road. The first two farms were abandoned, the gates locked and fields left fallow. The third had a for sale sign hammered into the ground. The silence in these places felt haunting, as though echoing the slow death of a once thriving community. Finally, he arrived at a place known as the Monroe Farm. An older woman, Linda Monroe, greeted him at the porch. She recognized the Keegan name, and her lined face softened with sympathy when he explained Martin's situation. "I heard about his heart trouble," she said, shaking her head. "We're all under a lot of pressure. I can spare a few tips on water-saving methods, but we're barely getting by ourselves." She showed him a small homemade reservoir where she collected rainwater off the barn roof. Not much, but every drop helps. She also mentioned a rumor that a new company, TerraFlow, had started offering sustainable water solutions in the neighboring county. "They say it's a group that invests in modern irrigation without demanding the farm's soul as collateral," Linda said, arching an eyebrow. "But I don't know if they operate here." Caleb jotted down notes, intrigued by the possibility of TerraFlow. Perhaps they were the polar opposite of Aqua Grow. If so, maybe that was the alliance the Keegans needed. The rest of the day yielded few new leads. Most farmers had sold, were about to sell, or simply didn't have resources to share. Returning to the orchard, Caleb felt the weight of isolation. Harriet called around noon to say Martin was stable but would remain in the hospital another day. Sarah was with him, trying to keep him from fretting over orchard duties. That evening, Harriet returned, exhaustion etched into her features. Caleb briefed her on his visits, the mention of TerraFlow catching her interest. "I've heard the name," she mused. "Some neighbors whispered about them, said they were too good to be true, but maybe we should find out." Caleb nodded. "If they really help farms keep water rights while updating irrigation, we should at least see if they'll meet with us." Harriet sighed, removing her shoes and rubbing her temples. "One more roll of the dice," she said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes if it means Martin can come home without the orchard weighing on his heart." Together, they sent a brief email to TerraFlow's general contact, an act of faith that perhaps, in this sprawling farmland, they weren't alone. Early the next day, a phone call jarred Harriet awake. Caleb, standing in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, watched her answer in a groggy voice. Her expression shifted from confusion to surprise, then a cautious hope. When she hung up, she looked at Caleb with wide eyes. "That was someone named Tyler Reed from TerraFlow. He's willing to meet us this afternoon if we can drive to their field office 2 counties over." Caleb felt a surge of adrenaline. "That's quick. Did you tell him about our orchard?" She nodded. "I gave him a brief rundown." He sounded genuinely concerned. "Said they've been trying to set up pilot programs for water sustainability in drought-hit areas." In short order, Harriet and Caleb prepared to leave. Harriet insisted on stopping by the hospital first to see Martin. They found him propped up in bed, color gradually returning to his cheeks. Sarah was there, too, relief evident in her tired eyes. Harriet explained the TerraFlow opportunity. Martin's lips pressed into a thin line. Be careful, he warned, voice still hoarse. We don't want another Aquagrow situation, but if they really are different, then go for it. Leaving Sarah to keep Martin calm, Harriet and Caleb drove east, the farmland melting into rolling hills dotted with dry grass. As they navigated the county roads, Harriet gripped the steering wheel with anxious determination. We have to make this work, she said quietly. I can't watch Martin deteriorate under the stress of fighting alone. TerraFlow's field office turned out to be a modest building attached to a demonstration farm. The parking lot was empty except for a few trucks bearing the company's logo, a stylized droplet of water encircled by leaves. Inside, they were greeted by a friendly receptionist who led them to a conference room. Tyler Reed was a tall, lean man in his 40s, wearing jeans and a polo shirt with the TerraFlow emblem. His demeanor was calm, eyes bright with empathy as he welcomed Harriet and Caleb. We're a small company with big ideas, he explained, referencing a laptop presentation about sustainable irrigation systems. TerraFlow offered modern drip technology, real-time moisture sensors, and overhead solar panels to reduce pumping costs. Crucially, they didn't require farmers to relinquish land or water rights. Instead, they entered revenue-sharing contracts tied to yield improvements. Harriet asked pointed questions, shaped by the family's scars from Aquagrow's tactics. Tyler answered patiently, acknowledging that trust was an issue in this industry. We're founded by a group of agricultural scientists and a few ex-military engineers. He explained, our aim is to help farms survive while staying independent. Caleb's ears perked at the mention of ex-military engineers. Memories of desert deployment flickered through his mind. I was in the Marines, he offered. Served as a combat engineer. Tyler's face lit up. We have a lead engineer who was Army Corps of Engineers. You might get along if you decide to partner with us. He'll be overseeing much of the technical integration. Something in Tyler's earnest tone nudged away Caleb's lingering skepticism. Maybe, just maybe. This was the lifeline the Keegans needed. Harriet glanced at him, hope shimmering in her eyes. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in months, a genuine possibility gleamed on the horizon. Leaving TerraFlow's field office, Harriet felt a nervous flutter in her chest, a mix of excitement and dread. She and Caleb had agreed to let Tyler Reed visit the Keegan orchard later in the week for an on-site assessment. As they drove home, dusty fields stretched on either side, the dryness of the land reflecting the gravity of their situation. If TerraFlow's proposal proved legitimate, it could be the break they desperately needed. If it turned out to be another trap, Martin and the orchard might not recover from the blow. They swung by the hospital before returning to the farm. Martin was awake, color slowly coming back to his cheeks. Sarah had gone home to shower, so Harriet filled her husband in on TerraFlow's offer. He listened with half-lidded eyes, nodding occasionally. Sounds promising, he muttered. Though a shadow of caution lingered, Caleb could tell Martin's mind was racing, even if his body remained frail in the hospital bed. Later, back at the orchard, Harriet phoned Sarah, who was taking care of some errands in town. Caleb lingered on the porch, scanning the orchard rows with a critical gaze. The drip system they'd installed in the southern plot was helping, but the rest of the acreage remained on the brink. Each hour without proper watering put more stress on the trees, and every day the specter of Aquagrow loomed larger. He recalled TerraFlow's mention of ex-military engineers. It struck a chord in him. Perhaps these people truly understood the mindset of serving a greater good. He also considered that Tyler's approach had felt refreshingly open, with no demands for water rights or property deeds. In a region where so many deals were predatory, TerraFlow's talk of cooperation shone like a beacon. Unable to shake his restless energy, Caleb hopped into the old truck and drove to the nearest orchard that hadn't been abandoned or sold. According to Harriet's list, it belonged to a woman named Julia Espinoza, rumored to be holding out against Aquagrow too. The property lay about 4 miles down a winding dirt road. When he arrived, he found a tidy but modest place, corrugated sheds, lines of grapefruit trees, and a single windmill creaking in the breeze. Julia herself appeared in the yard, holding a watering can. She eyed Caleb warily at first, but once he explained he was helping the Keegans, her demeanor softened. Like the Keegans, she battled mounting bills and an aging irrigation system. She'd heard of TerraFlow, though she knew few specifics. In hushed tones, she mentioned an upcoming community meeting at the local Grange Hall farmers who refused AquaGrow's advances were supposed to gather to swap ideas, maybe form a united front. Caleb's ears perked at that. "We need unity," he said, voice resolute. "None of us can stand alone much longer." Julia nodded in agreement. She offered to spread the word about the Keegan's orchard and TerraFlow's interest, though she warned that fear ran deep among the remaining independents. Driving back, the late afternoon sun bathed the orchards in a golden glow, but Caleb couldn't help noticing the dryness of the leaves. The land was crying out for relief. His heart clenched with a swirl of hope and apprehension. Soon, TerraFlow would arrive, and the orchard's fate might change forever. Whether that change would be salvation or another heartbreak remained uncertain. 2 days later, Tyler Reed arrived at the Keegan orchard accompanied by a colleague, a tall woman named Elise who introduced herself as TerraFlow's lead engineer. She wore jeans and a sun-beaten cap, exuding the easy confidence of someone used to working in rugged environments. Caleb felt an immediate sense of kinship when Elise mentioned she'd served in the Army Corps of Engineers for 7 years. Harriet greeted them at the porch, her posture stiff with a mix of nerves and polite hospitality. Martin was still in the hospital, slated for discharge soon if his vitals stayed stable. Sarah had returned early that morning, determined not to miss the meeting that could define their future. The four of them, Harriet, Sarah, Caleb, and the newly arrived TerraFlow duo, gathered around the kitchen table, a pitcher of lemonade at the center. Tyler laid out a thick folder of documents. "We believe in a revenue-sharing approach," he began, sliding charts and diagrams toward Harriet. "We install modern drip and sensor systems at minimal upfront cost. Once your yield improves, we take a portion of the increased profits capped at a fair percentage. That way, nobody gets exploited," Elise added. "Our technology uses real-time soil moisture data to ensure every drop of water counts. We've deployed similar setups in the Southwest, where drought conditions are severe. This orchard isn't large by corporate standards, but it's a perfect candidate for a sustainable demonstration project." Sarah scanned the papers, occasionally glancing at Harriet. The notion of remote sensors and data analytics felt like a leap into the modern age. "And how long would it take to install?" she asked, tapping the edge of a chart. "Installation can start within weeks," Elise replied. "We have a supply chain set up, plus a local team. The biggest hurdle is usually trust. Many farmers suspect an ulterior motive when they hear the words outside company." Harriet pursed her lips. "We have reason to suspect," she said wryly. "AquaGrow's tried to buy us out more than once, and their terms were, predatory." Tyler nodded sympathetically. "We're the opposite of AquaGrow. We want farmers to maintain ownership. Our long-term profit comes from technology licensing and system maintenance, not from controlling the land." His voice carried a sincerity that Caleb found disarming. It sounded like Tyler believed every word in his bones. Caleb glanced at Elise. "You mentioned Army Corps of Engineers." She smiled, served 3 tours overseas, helped build water infrastructure in conflict zones. "The civilian sector can be just as tough, but at least here we're not dodging bullets. I joined TerraFlow because it feels like an extension of that mission, providing water solutions to those who need it most." Caleb exhaled, feeling a familiar camaraderie ignite. "That's exactly why I joined the Marines in the first place," he said softly. "It's good to see those skills used for something constructive back home." Tyler then guided them through more specifics: how TerraFlow financed these projects, the expected timeline for orchard improvements, and possible expansions if the pilot program succeeded. Harriet asked pointed questions about contractual clauses and what happened if yields failed to increase. Sarah took notes diligently. By the end, the tension in the room had lessened. replaced by a cautious optimism. Harriet finally said, "We'd like Martin, my husband, to review everything. He's recovering from a heart attack, but we can't sign without him." Tyler and Elise agreed without hesitation. "We're ready whenever he is," Elise said, a warm smile crossing her face. "We're patient if it means saving a farm." That evening, Caleb and Sarah visited the hospital to share TerraFlow's proposal with Martin. He was propped up on pillows, still pale but alert. Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, meticulously going through the contract highlights, while Caleb hovered by the window, arms folded as he silently observed Martin's reactions. Martin's brow furrowed as he studied each page. At one point, he pressed a hand to his chest, sighing. "I've never seen a deal like this," he said, flicking a glance at Caleb. "It's almost too generous." Sarah nodded. "We felt the same, but so far, they seem genuine. Their lead engineer is ex-military, and Tyler's approach is transparent, no water rights signed over. They profit only if our yields improve. It's a risk for them, not just for us." Martin grunted. "And if it fails," Caleb answered, "they take the financial hit. But from what I've seen of their system, it's pretty robust. If it works as advertised, we could cut water usage by 30–40% and potentially increase the orchard's output." Martin's gaze traveled to the window, where the setting sun cast orange light across the parking lot. "If your mother were here," he murmured, voice trailing off. Then he shook his head. "Well, Harriet's always been a better judge of character than me. If she thinks this might save our orchard, I can at least consider it." A nurse stepped in to check Martin's vitals, briefly interrupting the conversation. While she worked, Sarah shared a few more details about how TerraFlow's sensors could help them micromanage moisture levels. Martin listened with a stoic expression, though Caleb sensed a spark in his eyes, the old desire to keep the orchard alive, no matter what. After the nurse left, Martin carefully set the documents aside. "I'm not signing anything from a hospital bed," he declared, "but I'll meet them once I'm discharged. Meanwhile, let Harriet make them show us real numbers, real examples. If they're legit, they should have references from other farms they have helped." Sarah agreed. "We can ask them to set up a site visit or something similar. I can follow up tomorrow." Caleb stepped closer. "Look, the orchard's stable for now. We rigged a partial drip system, replaced some piping. If we get TerraFlow's advanced setup, we can scale that progress. But we need you back home, boss. Nobody can steer this ship like you." Martin glanced at the heart monitor beeping softly beside him. "I suppose I owe it to all of you to heal quickly," he muttered. Then his gaze softened. "And Caleb, thanks for everything. You didn't have to step in, but you did." Caleb's throat tightened, memories of his own lonely struggles surfacing. "I couldn't let your orchard fall apart," he replied simply. "I see in you what I wish more people had shown me, a reason to keep fighting." A faint smile curved Martin's lips. "Then we'll fight together." The overhead light cast gentle shadows on his lined face, revealing a man who, though physically weakened, still possessed an unbreakable resolve to safeguard the land he loved. A few days later, Martin returned home to cautious celebration. Harriet fussed over him, ensuring he took his medication on time and avoided heavy lifting. Sarah, meanwhile, scheduled a follow-up meeting with Tyler and Elise for the upcoming Sunday, giving Martin enough time to rest and gather questions. Word of the TerraFlow proposal trickled through the local farming community. Julia Espinoza popped by to offer moral support and curious inquiries. "Heard they might help install solar panels too," she mentioned. "If that's true, it could drastically cut pumping costs." Sarah confirmed the rumor. Elise said they often add solar setups to power the new irrigation system. "It's part of their sustainability model." Julia nodded, her excitement obvious. She'd even approached 2 other orchard owners, hoping to rally them to the Keegan side. Caleb spent his mornings tending the orchard's partial drip lines, ensuring no new leaks had emerged. Martin, still under doctor's orders to avoid strenuous activity, leaned on a cane and supervised from a respectful distance. His physical frailty frustrated him, but Harriet's stern gaze kept him from disobeying orders. Some afternoons, Caleb and Sarah took short drives to neighboring properties, encouraging the few remaining independent farmers to attend the upcoming community meeting at the Grange Hall. Many farmers, burned by corporate approaches, were reluctant to trust any new enterprise, especially one that sounded too good to be true. Still, a few agreed to keep an open mind. One late afternoon, after returning from a supply run, Caleb found Martin sitting on the bunkhouse steps. The older man patted the wooden plank, inviting Caleb to sit beside him. In a quiet voice, Martin confessed, "I'm worried. Even if TerraFlow is on the level, it's going to take months for yields to recover. We might not have that long before bills pile up. And AquaGrow is like a vulture circling overhead." Caleb regarded the orchard rows that gleamed under the setting sun. "I get it," he said, remembering how quickly things could spiral. "But what choice do we have? We either gamble on TerraFlow or face a slow decline. If we can just hold out until harvest." Martin nodded, exhaustion creeping into his features. "I've fought my whole life to protect this land. Sometimes it feels like the rest of the world is content to let family farms vanish. But I know Harriet and Sarah won't give up. And then there's you, a stranger who became family." The words struck Caleb with an unexpected warmth. "I was drifting," he admitted. "No home, no direction. This place, it's given me a purpose. Let's see it through, sir." One step at a time, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Martin's gaze lingered on the orchard, as if silently renewing a vow to keep it thriving. In the hush of the evening, the two men, one battered by war, the other battered by the slow grind of farming life, found a shared resolve that transcended their individual stories. The orchard was their mission now, and they'd see it to a better future or go down fighting. Sunday morning arrived, bright and clear, with a hint of warmth presaging another dry afternoon. Tyler and Elise pulled up to the Keegan orchard in a white pickup bearing TerraFlow's logo. This time, Elise had brought a laptop filled with detailed schematics and a folder containing references from other farms TerraFlow had assisted. They convened in the workshop, which had been cleared of clutter to make room for a fold-out table and chairs. The dusty smell of metal and old wood mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee Harriet had set out. Martin looked both anxious and determined as he gestured for Tyler and Elise to sit. Elise began by showing slides of successful projects, small family farms in Arizona and New Mexico, where TerraFlow had installed precision drip systems powered by solar arrays. The photos portrayed healthy crops in parched landscapes, a testament to the technology's efficacy. In each case, Elise explained, we partnered with local farmers who retained full ownership. TerraFlow's revenue came from incremental gains in crop sales. Martin scrutinized each testimonial, occasionally muttering a question that Harriet or Sarah would echo out loud. Tyler calmly addressed the financial aspects. We structure the contract so TerraFlow invests in the upfront hardware. Our risk is that if yields don't rise, we won't recoup our investment. That motivates us to ensure everything works properly. Caleb chimed in. How do you handle unforeseen events like a bad storm or further water restrictions? Tyler acknowledged the concern. We have insurance for catastrophic losses, and we're lobbying counties to preserve sustainable water allocations for efficient farms. The logic is, if your orchard uses water responsibly, you should still get enough. Of course, we can't guarantee every political outcome. Elise clicked to a final slide showing an aerial view of the Keegan orchard, a satellite image TerraFlow had apparently acquired. Colored overlays indicated soil type variations, topography, and possible pipeline routes. She pointed at the southern plot, where Caleb had installed a rudimentary drip system. We'll upgrade this area first, integrating automated valves and moisture sensors. Then we'll expand to the remaining acreage in phases. The entire process could take a month or two, depending on labor and supply availability. Martin exchanged a look with Harriet, then turned back to the pair. What about solar? We're spending a fortune on electricity for pumping. Elise nodded. We'd install solar panels near the western boundary. Based on our calculations, that should cover up to 70% of your pump's energy needs. In peak sunlight, you might even generate surplus power. A hush followed her words, the enormity of the offer sinking in. Finally, I had to, Harriet said, and all this will cost us. How much right-of-way installation costs are on TerraFlow's shoulders? Tyler assured, we'll set up a shared revenue model once yields rise. You'd begin repaying a fraction of that expense only if we meet certain benchmarks. If those benchmarks aren't met, you pay nothing extra. Martin rubbed his chest, the weight of hope pressing into him. Sarah eyed the contract documents with a mixture of excitement and caution. Outside, a breeze rustled the orange trees, as though urging them to take the leap. At last, Martin said in a low voice, all right, let's go through the fine print, line by line. If it really checks out, we'll sign, but I can't make promises until I'm certain there are no hidden catches. The orchard's future is at stake. Tyler and Elise exchanged nods, ready for the scrutiny. They had come prepared, fully aware that saving a farm meant more than just installing hardware. It meant restoring a family's belief that the land they loved was worth fighting for. Over the next few hours, the workshop turned into a makeshift legal review office. Pages of contract text were spread across the table, Harriet taking careful notes in a spiral-bound notebook while Martin leaned forward, eyes flitting over clauses. Sarah asked clarifying questions about each section, from the percentages of revenue sharing to maintenance responsibilities and data privacy. Elise and Tyler remained patient, offering clarifications without pressuring. Caleb, for his part, alternated between reading and stepping outside to check on the orchard's pump. He felt a kind of nervous energy in the air, like waiting on the final outcome of a delicate mission. Around midday, Harriet proposed a break, and everyone headed to the farmhouse kitchen for sandwiches. The mood lightened slightly once they'd stepped away from the contract's dense language. Tyler complimented Harriet's cooking, and Elise remarked on how well the orchard's southern plot looked, praising the drip lines Caleb had rigged. Martin nodded along, though Caleb could see the swirl of thoughts behind his tired eyes. As they settled back into the workshop, Martin tapped a final page of the contract. Here it states that if yields improve by at least 15%, TerraFlow is entitled to a 10% share of the net increase. If yields jump 25% or more, that share becomes 15%. Is that correct? Tyler nodded. Correct. We set those tiers based on standard agronomic projections. If yields exceed 40%, we'd need to renegotiate or consider a bonus schedule. But that's quite rare, Elise added. The orchard's baseline yield will be established by averaging the last 3 harvests. We'll install sensors to track real-time growth metrics, so there's no guesswork. Every quarter, we'll compile data to see how we're performing. Martin exchanged a look with Harriet and Sarah. Harriet asked quietly, and if, for some reason, we have a drought so severe that no orchard can thrive? Tyler spread his hands. Then TerraFlow loses our upfront investment. You are not saddled with debt from that. We consider it a business risk, which we mitigate by carefully selecting sites and employing advanced efficiency measures. But yes, it's a risk we accept. A stillness overtook the group. Caleb found himself holding his breath. He recalled the suspicion that had dogged every corporate approach the Keegans had received. Yet TerraFlow spoke a language of partnership and sustainability, not ownership. Was it truly possible they'd found an ally instead of an adversary? Martin cleared his throat. I need to confirm references. Harriet, can you call a couple of the farmers listed here? He held up a reference sheet Elise had provided. Of course, Harriet replied. Sarah and I can do that right away. Tyler and Elise exchanged encouraging smiles. Please do, Tyler said. In fact, we insist on it. We want you to be absolutely certain you are comfortable with us. As Harriet and Sarah began dialing on phone numbers, Tyler and Elise stepped outside to get some fresh air. Caleb lingered next to Martin, who ran a hand over the wrinkled contract pages. I want to believe in this, Martin confessed in a hushed tone. But after Aquagrow, after everything, I'm scared to hope. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on Martin's shoulder. You're not alone in that fear, but sometimes hope is exactly what we need to survive. Yeah, Mom. Harriet and Sarah's reference checks took the better part of an hour. They reached two farmers in Arizona, both praising TerraFlow's technology and approach. One older gentleman joked that Tyler had practically become part of his family, visiting multiple times to fine-tune the system. Another woman, who owned a pecan orchard, lauded Elise's engineering prowess. She found a way to irrigate my trees more efficiently than I'd thought possible. And my water bill dropped by a third. She enthused. While mother and daughter made calls, Tyler and Elise strolled around the orchard with Caleb, examining the existing irrigation lines, the battered pump, and the partial drip system. Elise took notes on a tablet, snapping photos of particularly concerning leaks or bottlenecks. We'll likely replace the main pump with a variable speed model. She told Caleb, it'll match flow demands precisely, instead of running full blast and wasting energy. Caleb nodded, impressed by her practical insights. I improvised drip lines in a war zone, he said, recounting bits of his service. But this orchard is a different beast. The scale, the old infrastructure, the drought, it feels like patching a sinking ship. Elise smiled sympathetically. I get it. We did reconstruction work where everything was either destroyed or obsolete. Still, if there's determination and the right tools, we can do wonders. Tyler trailed behind, taking a phone call. He finished and rejoined them, shrugging off his jacket in the midday heat. That was our HQ, he explained. They're approving fast-track implementation if the Keegans sign on. We've got an installation crew ready in about 3 weeks, possibly sooner. They reached the southern plot, where the orchard's trees looked marginally healthier. Leaves no longer wilting as severely. Elise crouched beside one tree, feeling the soil. You did a decent job distributing moisture. With better emitters and monitoring, we could nurse these back to robust health. Caleb felt a flicker of pride. I just used what we had. But yeah, it's been helping. They walked back to the farmhouse, crossing paths with Harriet and Sarah stepping onto the porch. Their faces carried cautious smiles. We spoke to 2 references, Harriet reported, glancing at Martin, who stood by the door. Both were extremely positive. One said TerraFlow saved their operation from bankruptcy. Martin's jaw tightened, a swirl of emotions playing across his features. Then it's real, he said quietly. Tyler inclined his head. We wouldn't be here otherwise. The question is, do you trust us enough to become partners? A hush followed, broken only by the rustle of orchard leaves and the low hum of the old pump. Then Harriet took a deep breath, turning to Martin. It's your call, dear. Martin locked eyes with Caleb, Sarah, and Harriet in turn. There was fear, but also resolve, in his gaze. Let's do it, he said finally, voice trembling with the weight of the decision. I won't let this land die if we have a chance to save it. Tyler exhaled in relief, and Elise's face lit up. As they all headed inside to finalize the paperwork, Caleb couldn't help but feel that a new chapter was unfolding, a fragile promise that perseverance and unity could still find a foothold in this parched, weary land. The signing took place in the same workshop that had once witnessed Martin's father tinkering with metal parts decades earlier. Now, Tyler spread the final contract pages on the workbench. with Harriet, Sarah, and Caleb standing by. Martin carefully signed each document. His hand shook slightly, a visible acknowledgement that this was no small gamble. Elise countersigned on behalf of TerraFlow. After the ink dried, a strange hush enveloped the space, as though the orchard itself was holding its breath. Martin let out a long sigh. "All right," he murmured, setting the pen down. "We're in." "Congratulations," Tyler said, offering a respectful handshake. Elise followed suit, her grip firm. "We'll coordinate equipment delivery and labor schedules immediately." Harriet squeezed Martin's arm. Sarah exhaled a breath she must have been holding for days. Caleb saw a kind of mixture in everyone's eyes: excitement, caution, relief, and a touch of the unknown. For so long, the orchard had teetered on the brink of collapse. Now, for the first time, there was a genuine blueprint for revival. Over a lunch, Harriet prepared fresh salad, homemade rolls, and roast chicken. The atmosphere warmed. Tyler and Elise asked about the orchard's history, jotted more details about row spacing, soil composition, and weather patterns. Harriet even dug out old photo albums, showing pictures of Martin's father and grandfather picking oranges in the orchard's heyday. Caleb listened intently to the stories, seeing parallels between this family's legacy and the farmland he'd seen overseas, places where generational ties to the earth were as strong as any nationality. He also noticed a subtle shift in Martin's demeanor, though still pale. Martin seemed lighter, as if the burden of an impossible choice had been lifted. After dessert, Harriet walked Tyler and Elise out to their truck. Sarah offered to help, leaving Caleb alone with Martin for a moment. The older man traced a finger along the rim of his coffee mug. "I don't often admit fear," Martin said quietly, staring at the worn tabletop. "But signing that contract scared me more than facing down Aquagrow. Because if TerraFlow fails, we lose precious time. My heart might not handle another disaster." Caleb swallowed hard. "TerraFlow won't fail if we do our part. They're not miracle workers, they'll need our cooperation. But we have that in spades." Martin's lips twitched into a small smile. "When you first showed up, I thought you were just a drifter, someone looking for a free meal. Guess I was wrong." Caleb shrugged. "I was drifting, that's true. But this orchard, it gave me a reason to stand still, to care again. Thank you for trusting me." A moment of understanding passed between them. A bond forged not by blood but by sweat, tears, and the shared fight for survival. Outside, Harriet's voice floated in from the porch, laughter intermingling with the sound of the departing TerraFlow truck. The orchard's next chapter had begun, and for better or worse, they would face its trials together. Over the next week, a sense of urgency fueled every waking moment at the Keegan orchard. TerraFlow sent teams to survey the land with laser levels, mark optimal spots for solar panels, and finalize the blueprint for the advanced irrigation system. Trucks delivered bundles of piping, rows of drip emitters, and large crates containing the variable speed pump that would replace the old wheezing contraption they'd patched weeks ago. Caleb threw himself into the work, coordinating with Elise, who led the engineering side. She set up portable data loggers around the orchard to capture soil moisture readings in real time. Harriet and Sarah often scurried between the orchard rows and the farmhouse, ensuring the workers had water, shade breaks, and directions to the next installation zone. Martin, though under doctor's orders to avoid heavy labor, observed from a golf cart TerraFlow had rented for him, insisting he had to see everything with his own eyes. Whenever the orchard crews had downtime, Tyler organized short information sessions, explaining to local farmers how the system functioned. The transformation turned the Keegan orchard into a mini demonstration site, with neighbors popping in to watch the process. Julia Espinoza came by, impressed by how swiftly TerraFlow mobilized. "If this works, I'll sign on next," she declared, eyes shining with cautious hope. Caleb felt a renewed sense of purpose each day. He helped mount solar panels in neat rows near the orchard's western boundary. Under Elise's guidance, they secured the panels to angled frames that would capture the intense California sun. Wires led to a central inverter, which would feed electricity to the new pump house. This system should drastically cut your power bills, Elise assured Martin during one of their check-ins. You might even net meter excess energy back to the grid on sunny days. Martin said little, but his stern face softened whenever he glimpsed the orchard's transformation. Harriet, too, seemed more optimistic, though she remained vigilant about finances. She spent evenings at the kitchen table, logging daily expenses, comparing them to TerraFlow's promised coverage. Tyler provided regular updates, acknowledging that while TerraFlow was fronting the bulk of costs, some minor incidentals might arise. One afternoon, as they tested the newly installed pump, the orchard erupted with excitement. Water gushed through the brand new pipes, and a network of drip lines snaked across the orchard floor. Tiny emitters released controlled droplets around each tree's root zone. Solar power hummed quietly into the background. Gone was the roar of an overtaxed motor. In its place stood an efficient, precisely calibrated system. Caleb watched in awe, remembering how he'd once jury-rigged an improvised pump in a battle-scarred desert village halfway around the world. That had saved lives then. This, he realized, might be saving lives here an entire way of life. In fact, Harriet brushed away tears as she witnessed the orchard's revival unfolding in real time. The next step involved hooking up the sensors, so the system could automatically adjust flow based on each section's needs. Elise explained the software interface to Sarah, who caught on quickly, having studied agricultural management at college. By sunset, they had a functioning smart irrigation system that would have seemed like science fiction just a few weeks prior. As the final rays of daylight swept across the orchard, Martin raised a trembling hand to the brim of his hat in salute. No words were spoken, but in that gesture lay a potent gratitude, a silent message of thanks to the team that had granted him hope. Tajem. Early the next morning, the orchard buzzed with new routines. Harriet woke at dawn to check the solar panel output, something she'd never imagined doing in her lifetime. Sarah used a tablet to monitor real-time moisture data, pinpointing which sections of the orchard needed more water. Caleb and Elise continued to fine-tune the distribution valves, verifying that every drip emitter performed optimally. Martin, true to form, insisted on patrolling the rows in his golf cart, though he still tired easily. "I'll rest when I'm dead," he joked grimly, earning stern warnings from Harriet about overexertion. Yet he couldn't hide his awe each time the sensors adjusted flow to precisely match the orchard's needs. "It's like having 1,000 little eyes on the soil," he marveled. TerraFlow's main crew packed up by midday, leaving behind a smaller team for ongoing support. Tyler had a farewell conversation with the Keegans, promising to check back regularly. "We'll keep analyzing your yield data, and we're always a phone call away," he said, shaking Martin's hand. "Just remember, we succeed when you succeed." The orchard felt oddly quiet once the bulk of the crew departed. Caleb strolled the perimeter with Sarah, verifying every station was labeled correctly. As they worked, Sarah grew reflective, pausing to admire the neat lines of solar panels in the distance. "I can't believe how quickly this all happened," she murmured. "We used to dream of modernizing, but money was always the barrier." Caleb nodded. "It's a testament to how starved small farms are for real solutions. Maybe TerraFlow can replicate this model across the state, and families like yours won't have to face losing their land." Sarah studied him for a moment, eyes bright with unspoken appreciation. "You've done more than you know. You know that we might not have dared to trust TerraFlow if you hadn't walked into our lives." A faint flush rose to Caleb's cheeks. "It was luck, or fate," he said softly. "I just did what needed doing." They passed an old scarecrow propped against a fence post, tattered but stalwart in its watch. The orchard's transformation stood in stark contrast, a testament to hope in a place once overshadowed by desperation. Sarah's hand lightly brushed Caleb's as they navigated a narrow path, and neither pulled away. A shared warmth lingered in the air, though neither spoke of it directly. That evening, with the orchard at peace, Harriet prepared a celebratory dinner. Martin insisted on saying grace, a rare occurrence that reflected the depth of his gratitude. "We give thanks," he said, voice trembling slightly, "for new beginnings when all seem lost, and for the people who appear in our darkest hour." When dinner ended, they spread out on the porch, watching a calm sunset bathe the orchard in gold. Martin sighed with contentment. Harriet leaned her head on his shoulder. Sarah and Caleb sat side by side. The orchard's new irrigation lines glistened in the twilight, each droplet a promise. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges. No doubt, but tonight, the Keegans savored a hard-won sense of renewal. A week passed in relative harmony. Yields wouldn't be evident for some time, but the orchard already looked healthier, leaves grew brighter, and small clusters of blossoms hinted at promising fruit cycles. Harriet tracked solar output daily, beaming whenever she saw just how much electricity they were producing. Sarah checked moisture levels, calibrating the system so that each zone received exactly what it needed. The orchard felt alive again. Then, one afternoon, a black SUV with tinted windows rumbled down the driveway, fracturing the peaceful routine. Caleb spotted it first and felt his stomach tighten. It was the same vehicle model Aquagrow had used in previous visits, and sure enough, the license plate matched. He motioned to Harriet, who quickly emerged from the house, her expression darkening. The SUV door opened, revealing a tall man in a suit, Daniel Walsh, the Aquagrow representative who'd visited them before. With him stood another, a younger associate carrying a briefcase. Walsh offered a thin, practiced smile. "Good day, Mrs. Keegan. I see you've made some changes to your orchard." Harriet didn't bother hiding her distaste. "We have. What business is it of yours?" Walsh gestured toward the rows of new drip lines. "Quite an investment. But is it wise, considering your financial position? We came to offer our assistance again. There's still an opportunity to sell your water rights at a premium." His smile widened, revealing pearly teeth that lacked any genuine warmth. Martin arrived in the golf cart, parking behind Harriet. Sarah stood beside Caleb, arms folded. "We're not selling," Martin declared, his tone revealing how tired he was of repeating that phrase. "I thought we made that clear." Walsh's associate opened the briefcase, extracting some documents. "Surely you're aware that the region's water board is considering further restrictions?" he said smoothly. "Aquagrow can shield you from that. We have guaranteed reserves, and your orchard would thrive under our ownership." "Of course," Harriet's jaw tightened. "We're already partnered with TerraFlow. We don't need your so-called rescue." Walsh's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. TerraFlow, the upstart outfit that invests in small farms with no guaranteed return. That's a risky partnership. "What if they pull out or fail to deliver results?" Sarah cut in, voice trembling with anger. "They've already delivered more help than you ever did." "Please leave." Walsh gave a long-suffering sigh, as if dealing with stubborn children. "Think carefully. If TerraFlow's system fails, or if the drought intensifies, you'll come knocking on our door soon enough, and our terms then might not be so generous." With that, he snapped his fingers at his associate, who promptly handed Harriet a sealed envelope. "This is our final written offer, valid for 30 days. After that, we assume you've chosen a different path." Harriet snatched the envelope, glancing at it like it might be laced with poison. "You can take your 30 days and shove it," she hissed. Walsh shrugged, returning to the SUV. "Suit yourselves," he said before slipping into the driver's seat. The vehicle roared away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. A tense silence hung over the orchard. Martin gripped the golf cart's steering wheel. Harriet clutched the envelope, and Sarah's eyes brimmed with fury. Caleb placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We stand together," he whispered, anger smoldering in his own chest. They all realized that Aquagrow would not give up easily, and that the orchard's fight for autonomy had reached a new level of threat. The confrontation with Aquagrow rattled everyone. That evening, they gathered around the farmhouse dining table, the unopened envelope lying ominously at the center like a coiled snake. Martin stared at it as though expecting it to spring at any moment. While Harriet tried to calm her nerves by sipping chamomile tea, Sarah was too angry to eat, pacing restlessly. Caleb lingered in the corner, arms crossed, scanning their faces. Finally, nearby, Harriet broke the silence. Let's at least see what they're proposing, so we're not blindsided. Reluctantly, Martin nodded. Harriet tore open the envelope, removing a thick set of papers. She skimmed the pages, her scowl deepening. They're offering a lump sum for the orchard's water rights well above standard market rate. But if we sign, we lose all control. They could redirect water flow as they see fit and eventually transition us into contract growers on our own land. Sarah let out a sharp breath. It's practically theft, just gift-wrapped in fancy legal language. Caleb moved closer. What's the timeline? They mentioned 30 days. Harriet flipped to the last page. Yes, it expires after a month. Aquagrow claims that after that, they'll no longer honor any buyout. It's essentially a final chance to surrender before they resort to more drastic measures. Martin's knuckles whitened on the table's edge. They're banking on TerraFlow failing. Or on our orchard collapsing under new water regulations. Then we'd come crawling back. Sarah snapped. That's not going to happen. TerraFlow's system is working. The orchard's already improving. If Aquagrow thinks we're so desperate, let them wait forever. Yet Harriet's brow furrowed with worry. New regulations could be a game changer. If the water board slashes allocations to small farms, what if TerraFlow can't help us navigate that? Or if we need more capital than TerraFlow can supply? Caleb cleared his throat, trying to inject calm. We have to trust our partnership. We also need to connect with other farms. If enough of us stand together and present a unified front, the water board might reconsider cutting small independents off. We can't fight alone. Sarah paused her pacing. The community meeting at the Grange Hall. Julia mentioned it might happen soon. That's our chance to unify. Martin drummed his fingers on the table, gazing at Harriet. Let's keep the envelope, but we're not signing anything. Let's see if we can rally enough support. If other farms see what TerraFlow has done here, maybe they'll resist Aquagrow's intimidation. Harriet nodded, though her expression remained tense. All right, but we should warn Tyler. He deserves to know Aquagrow is stepping up their pressure. They adjourned soon after, each weighed down by anxiety. Sarah lingered a moment, eyes flicking to Caleb. I hate them, she whispered. They bully and threaten, hoping we'll break. Caleb placed a reassuring hand over hers. We won't let them break us. I've seen bullies before, in uniform and out. The only way they win is if they scare people into giving up. In the quiet that followed, Harriet calmly placed Aquagrow's offer inside a kitchen drawer, out of sight but never out of mind. The orchard's progress under TerraFlow felt real and substantial, but Aquagrow's looming presence cast a long shadow. As the wind rattled the windows that night, it seemed to echo Aquagrow's veiled threats. Time was ticking, and the orchard's future hung in a delicate balance. 2 days later, the long-awaited community meeting took place at the Knoxville Grange Hall, a modest wooden building with peeling paint in a gravel parking lot. Harriet, Martin insisting he felt well enough, Sarah, and Caleb drove over in the family pickup at dusk. They arrived to see about 20 vehicles scattered around, some older trucks bearing orchard names in faded lettering, others unmarked but covered in dust from country roads. Inside, folding chairs formed a loose circle. Conversations buzzed as anxious farmers exchanged stories of intimidation by Aquagrow or lamented the rising costs of water. Julia Espinoza waved the Keegans over, greeting them with a worried smile. You're the talk of the valley, she said in a low voice to Harriet. Word's out that TerraFlow has transformed your orchard practically overnight. Harriet gave a humble shrug. We're still in early stages, but yes, it's helping. Soon, an older man named Roger McAllister, who owned a sizable peach orchard, called the meeting to order. He tapped a makeshift gavel on a wooden table. "We're here because enough is enough," he began, his gravelly voice projecting frustration. "Aquagrow's picking us off, one by one, using fear and money to turn neighbors into sellouts. We have to stand together or we'll all lose." A chorus of murmured agreement rippled through the group. One by one, farmers stood to share their experiences. Some had stories of final offers from Aquagrow, eerily similar to the envelope Harriet had received. Others recounted how water bills skyrocketed after signing partial deals that gave Aquagrow partial control of wells. When it came to Keegan's turn, Martin rose slowly, leaning on a cane. He explained how TerraFlow had come in, installing a solar-powered drip system at minimal cost. "We've cut water use already," he said, voice rough but resolute. "Aquagrow's threatened us again, but we're not budging." Eyes widened across the room. One woman asked, "So you didn't pay anything up front?" Martin shook his head. "TerraFlow invests. They make money if we make money. No land or water rights were signed away. It's the polar opposite of Aquagrow's model." A flurry of questions ensued, many turning to Harriet and Sarah for details. Could TerraFlow do the same for other farms? Did the contract have any hidden clauses? Caleb stepped in, describing the technical aspects of the new system, how it integrated with sensor data to reduce waste. His practical, former military tone gave weight to his words, and more than a few farmers leaned forward, intrigued, yet skepticism hovered. Roger McAllister scratched his chin. "Aquagrow's big. They have lawyers, lobbyists, political clout. Even if TerraFlow helps us upgrade, can they shield us from the next wave of water restrictions or county regulations?" Caleb sighed, meeting Roger's gaze. "No single company can guarantee political outcomes. But if we collectively advocate for ourselves, showing we're using water responsibly, we might gain leverage with regulators." "Strength in numbers." Julia raised her voice. "We need to form a coalition, pool our data to prove to the county that we're not wasting water. If TerraFlow can replicate what they did at the Keegans, we'd have a strong case." Encouraged whispers erupted. For the first time, a glimmer of unity sparked among the battered farmers. Harriet caught Sarah's eye. A sense of shared conviction passed between mother and daughter. This meeting wasn't just a gripe session. It was the seed of a rebellion against corporate predation, rooted in hope for a future they might shape themselves. By the meeting's end, a rough plan emerged. Volunteers formed a small steering committee, Julia Espinoza, Roger McAllister, and a few others to meet with TerraFlow representatives and explore a collective adoption of their methods. Each farmer who remained independent would fill out a survey detailing their orchard size, water usage, and financial constraints. Caleb offered to coordinate the technical details, leveraging his rapport with Elise and Tyler. Outside, the night sky stretched above the Grange Hall, stars flickering like distant watchfires. Farmers trickled out in small groups, discussing next steps. Harriet, Martin, Sarah, and Caleb lingered to chat with Julia and Roger. The older man wore a weary smile as he locked up the hall. "This is the first time in months I've felt like we actually stand a chance," he admitted. "If TerraFlow is as fair as you say, maybe we can save our farms without signing our souls away." Martin, exhausted from the evening's efforts, sank onto a bench near the entrance while Harriet fetched the truck. Caleb noticed sweat beading on Martin's brow, concern flickering in his own eyes. "You okay, boss?" he asked quietly. Martin gave a gruff nod, "Just a bit winded. Not as spry as I used to be." But the determination in his eyes remained. "This orchard, this county, we've got fight in us yet." Sarah patted her father's shoulder. "We'll get you home soon." Mom's pulling the truck around. Roger and Julia exchanged good nights, the glow of headlights sweeping across the parking lot as more vehicles departed. Standing there under the moonlit sky, Caleb reflected on how an entire community's fate balanced precariously on trust in TerraFlow, in each other, and in the possibility of forging a new path. When Harriet arrived with the truck, Martin allowed Caleb and Sarah to help him inside, though he grumbled about being handled like fragile glass. Harriet navigated the quiet roads back to the orchard, headlights revealing twisting lanes flanked by endless rows of trees. A hush settled in the cab, each occupant lost in thought. Eventually, Harriet spoke softly. Tonight was good. The best meeting we've had in ages. People finally see a glimmer of hope beyond Aquagrow's checks. Sarah nodded. If TerraFlow can replicate the success they have had with us, we might tip the scales county-wide. In the back seat, Martin exhaled slowly, eyes shut. Caleb glanced at him, noting the slight smile on his lips. Perhaps the orchard's patriarch, so often overshadowed by fear, allowed himself a moment of pride in what they'd accomplished. A silent vow formed in Caleb's mind to stand beside these farmers until corporate greed loosened its stranglehold, until the orchard thrived again under the blazing California sun. They arrived home, Harriet guiding the truck up the long driveway toward the softly lit farmhouse. Outside, the orchard dozed in gentle moonlight, the new drip lines glinting like silver threads. As Caleb helped Martin down, the older man placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. No words were needed. The gesture spoke volumes. Together, they'd face whatever came next. And with each passing day, the orchard's pulse grew a little stronger, fed by fresh water and unwavering resolve. In the weeks that followed, the Keegan orchard blossomed like a phoenix rising from ash. The once wilted leaves grew lush and vibrant. Tiny green citrus bulbs appeared among the branches, promising a robust harvest if nature remained kind. Solar-powered pumps hummed quietly, distributing water with near surgical precision. Each day, Harriet documented energy savings, sometimes squealing with delight when she saw how much less they owed the power company. Sarah became adept at reading the sensor data on her tablet, adjusting irrigation schedules based on real-time conditions. She'd walk the rows at sunrise, scanning leaves for signs of over or underwatering, and calibrating the system accordingly. Neighbors dropped to witness the transformation, amazement dancing in their eyes. Some had already begun initial talks with TerraFlow. Others, though cautious, found it harder to dismiss the obvious proof sprouting right before them. Martin's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. He still used a cane, though his heart no longer skipped in panicked bursts. Each time he ventured into the orchard, a soft pride lit his face. To see the land he'd nursed for decades thriving once more sparked an almost childlike joy. Harriet caught him smiling at odd moments, as though he couldn't believe this wasn't a dream. Yet despite the orchard's renewal, Aquagrow's dark shadow persisted. Rumors circulated of more forced buyouts in the next county over, with some orchard owners caving in after intimidation tactics. The local water board also hinted at potential new restrictions, nothing official, but enough to keep farmers on edge. Julia and Roger's steering committee pressed forward, gathering data from half a dozen orchard families seeking to replicate the Keegan success. They plan to present a unified front at the next water board meeting, advocating for sustainable, sensor-driven irrigation as the model for the region. Caleb found himself thrust into a leadership role within that budding coalition. Elise and Tyler occasionally returned to the orchard, consulting with the committee and offering technical guidance for other participants. Caleb's days were filled with phone calls, orchard visits, and helping distressed farmers understand how TerraFlow's revenue sharing worked. Each conversation reminded him of his old military deployments, where forging alliances with local communities had been the key to stability. Meanwhile, tensions simmered just beneath the surface. A new email from Aquagrow arrived, This time laced with thinly veiled threats, they warned of legal consequences if TerraFlow's expansions infringed on existing water rights. Tyler brushed off the warnings, citing TerraFlow's compliance with all regulations. But Harriet lost sleep over the possibility of drawn-out lawsuits. Martin insisted no lawsuit would scare him into submission. Sarah tried to keep them all balanced, but the stress weighed heavily. One night, after a long day of orchard work and coalition building, Caleb retreated to the bunkhouse porch. He gazed at the star-laden sky, heart swaying between pride in what they'd achieved and dread of the battles yet to come. Then Sarah appeared, a faint smile playing on her lips. She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching, and quietly said, "We might not have it all figured out, but at least we're not alone anymore." He turned to meet her eyes, recalling his first night at this orchard, tired, homeless, uncertain. Now everything had changed. The orchard thrived, a community rallied, and in Sarah's gaze, he found a promise of not just land reborn, but hearts awakened. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would stand firm, guided by the unwavering faith that this farm and the bonds it had forged were worth defending to the end. And that, my friends, brings our story to a hopeful conclusion. From a rundown orchard teetering on the edge, we've witnessed a sweeping transformation, one powered not just by state-of-the-art technology, but by unwavering determination and a deep-rooted sense of community. Our veteran-turned-engineer found purpose again. The Keegan family rediscovered hope, and a whole network of farms learned that unity can push back against even the largest corporate forces. Personally, I believe this tale shows that no matter how stacked the odds, perseverance and good people can still create a brighter future. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you side with the underdogs or see merit in corporate intervention? Let's discuss. Thank you for watching, and if this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. We can't wait to bring you more inspiring, uplifting stories like this one together. We keep the spirit of hope alive.